Long before the pyramids and spectacular temples sprawled across Egypt, King Narmer founded the first dynasty in pharaonic history. For over 3,000 years, 345 pharaohs succeeded one another until the inevitable fall of ancient Egypt. Some of these kings became legendary. One of them is remembered for his eternal tomb, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world.
It's like coming across a diamond in its natural state.
No king since then has built a pyramid so high.
But what do we know about Khufu? What kind of pharaoh was he?
He had delusions of grandeur.
He said that very clearly, that he prostituted his own daughter to get stones to build his pyramid.
What drove him to build such a monumental tomb? What was he thinking?
He hoped to go on this boat and ascend to the stars and sail around the night sky and join the sun god in his nightly journey.
Now, international experts share their insights to reveal the true story of the builder pharaoh with a monumentally bad reputation.
The name suggests the oppressor par excellence.
Khufu became a hero of sorts, of a series of tales that show him as somebody who is curious and interested about magic, religion, the world around him.
These are the final secrets of Khufu's unique journey. A pharaoh whose life transformed the world and changed the course of history. Khufu, a name that has stood the test of time thanks to Egypt's famous pyramid. Visible from space, this colossal monument is the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing.
This is undoubtedly one of the most extraordinary creations of ancient man. It's gigantic. You feel very small when you stand at its foot.
When you look at the Great Pyramid, it inspires awe and wonder, how could somebody build something so massive?
But Khufu is above all the name of the pharaoh who ordered its construction. Who was this Egyptian king? Why did he have such a building erected? What does this enormous stone edifice reveal about his personality?
The paradox of Khufu's reign is that in the end, we have perhaps the most obvious monument in all of Egypt, and this king remains fairly unknown.
We know so little about Khufu because we just do not have texts at this period, narrative texts, that tell us about events or the personality or the person of the king.
Despite this lack of information, our teams went out into the field in search of clues as to who Khufu was. It's the start of an exciting archaeological investigation into the life of an extraordinary ruler, which takes us back almost 4,600 years to the court of the pharaohs. We are in Egypt, 2,600 years BCE. At the time, the land of the pharaohs was not yet the model of civilization that would inspire so many others. It was during this period of construction that Khufu was born and grew up.
We don't know much about Khufu's childhood because we don't really have any sort of sources contemporary to the reign of Khufu that would give us a clue. So we'd have to sort of imagine what his childhood was like.
To reconstruct the information, you have to study the monuments, study the sites where you can observe this king's activity.
What we do know is that his father wasn't just anyone. He's Pharaoh Sneferu, founder of the 4th of Egypt's 33 dynasties, the one commonly referred to as the Golden Age of the Pyramids.
The 4th dynasty was truly the beginning of the Egyptian state. It was a period when the king was virtually all-powerful, and the projects he developed gave the impression that there was no limit to his power and ability to build giant monuments.
In addition to firmly ruling the kingdom, Sneferu ensured the country's balance and future. He offered the Egyptian crown to not one, but many successors. Among them, the future pharaoh Khufu.
Sneferu had to educate Prince Khufu, as well as the other royal children, for succession. The disappearance of one of the royal children was never safe, so we prefer to bet on security.
What we do know about Khufu is that he was a young man because he had at least 4, maybe 5 older brothers who died before him and who died before Khufu's father.
At birth, Khufu was not the heir to the throne or his father's designated successor. However, the young prince's destiny began to be written in his wake.
His father was a great pyramid builder, arguably the pyramid builder. He's the one who figured out how to effectively build smooth-sided true pyramids.
Sneferu did all the research and the development that made Khufu's pyramid possible because when Sneferu came to the throne, no pyramid had been completed since the time of Djoser.
The pyramid is a funerary tomb invented by the visionary pharaoh Djoser, 75 years before Sneferu. Its purpose was to allow the pharaoh's soul to join the god of the solar disk, Ra, on his death. This so-called step pyramid, with its giant staircases on all 4 sides, was a model for the father of Khufu.
Other kings tried to build a pyramid like Djoser. They failed.
During his 28-year reign, Sneferu succeeded in building not 1, but 3 100-meter-high pyramids. Here, on the site of Dashur, 10 kilometers south of Djoser's funerary complex at Saqqara, he revolutionized pyramid construction.
We're going to see several different pyramids, attempts at proto-pyramids. There's the rhomboid pyramid, which has a slightly pointed shape, and then slopes that are a little steeper on the bases. We have stepped pyramids.
Khufu grew up around his father. He would have seen architects discussing how to build pyramids, and he would have grown up with the idea set by his father that the mark of being a king is building a burial place for yourself that honors your place as the son of the gods and that can transport your soul into the afterlife. So Khufu would have said, I need to build an amazing pyramid.
This pyramid is like no other. A marvel of human engineering that 110,000 people have the privilege of visiting every year. It was at its foot that, at the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists made the greatest discovery on the Giza Plateau. This exceptional find would provide invaluable insights into the life of the fascinating and mysterious pharaoh, Khufu.
They found a burial shaft there that was completely filled in. And when they excavated this burial shaft, they had access to a burial chamber that was still completely intact. And they discovered a sarcophagus, a chest with canopic vases. They also found an armchair, a sedan chair, a bed. All this equipment belonged to Queen Hetepheres.
Hetepheres I, a little-known yet important figure in the life of the owner of the world's largest pyramid. She was the wife of Pharaoh Sefru and the mother of Khufu. Egyptologists wondered, why is her tomb next to her sons on the Giza Plateau and not next to her husband's at Dashur, 30 kilometers further south?
That assumes that Sneferu was dead, and the queen was still alive when Khufu ascended the throne. From then on, when she died, the king had her buried near his tomb. She was practically deified, and sometimes even placed above the pharaoh. Why was this? Because she had carnally known the god.
This god is her husband, Pharaoh Sneferu. For in ancient Egypt, the king was not just a mortal being, he was a divine being. On his death, which scientists estimate to have occurred around 2600 BCE, his young son Khufu ascended the throne and became, in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, a god too. And he's determined to leave his mark on the land of the Black Earth.
We know he was ambitious because to lay out a square, as big as the Great Pyramid, it takes a hell of a lot of ambition to make sure that you're going to bring it to a point.
You'd think this character was suffering from delusions of grandeur. I think he wanted to surpass his father, Sneferu. He couldn't build 3 pyramids, so he built just one bigger than the others.
The Pyramid of Khufu. At 146 meters high when completed, half the height of the Eiffel Tower, it continues to fascinate generations of Egyptophiles.
No subsequent king ever built a pyramid so high.
The pyramid was the ideal thing to build to become a proper king, to be an effective ruler, and to live on forever and have this glorious afterlife.
In the minds of the Egyptians, life on Earth was just the beginning of eternal life in the great beyond. So Khufu wanted to leave his mark on eternity through his pyramid, which would survive him for millennia until the end of time. We can see that he wasn't entirely wrong.
More than 2,300,000 blocks of stone were needed for its construction. The weight of this colossal edifice is over 6 million tons, or 13 times the weight of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest skyscraper.
He would have had to have been inquisitive. How can we build this better? How can we make it taller? What can we do? And so I think that's a nice way of looking at his reign.
We'd have to wait for Khufu for several generations before we finally managed to find the perfect pyramid, the ideal slope, like the angle of the sand that you let fall naturally from your hand. It forms a little pile with exactly the same angle.
A titanic structure whose exterior facade was the work of a goldsmith. Unfortunately, it can no longer be seen today.
Its facing has disappeared, so it looks like it's made up of small steps. But in fact, at the time, it was perfectly smooth, in light-colored stone with a pyramidion made of electrum, a gold-silver alloy that reflects the sun. It's like coming across a diamond in its natural state.
Khufu seems to have devoted himself to the creation of this diamond right from the start of his reign. To set himself apart from his father, Sneferu, and Pharaoh Djoser, he decided to build his pyramid on a new site. He didn't know it then, but it would become Egypt's most visited site over 46 centuries later. The Giza Plateau.
His father had left Saqqara to build pyramids further south. And quite simply, the Giza Plateau to the north of the Red Pyramid was a fairly open, practical quarry, which ultimately made it possible to build the Great Pyramid.
Located 15 kilometers from Cairo, the site not only had an advantage in terms of stone supply, but it also had another more symbolic interest for the young pharaoh.
We're not far from the father, but we're also not far from everything Saqqara, everything Djoser, which was sacred because ancestor pharaohs are living gods.
By reclaiming his predecessors as gods in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, Khufu established himself as a great pharaoh. This pyramid was to symbolize his power, and by extension, that of all Egypt. But to build it, he needed resources.
According to the archaeological documentation we've found, to build a monument like this king's pyramid, which was the central work of his reign, materials had to be mined all over Egypt.
To get there, the pharaoh could count on a veritable natural highway, the Nile. At 6,650 kilometers, it's the second longest river in the world, the same distance as between Paris and Chicago. It is the beating heart of the Egyptian economy, enabling trade between the north and south of the kingdom.
The way that Egypt became prosperous was through this regular flood. And for Khufu, it took on extra importance because the flood in the river was how he would make his construction projects.
Khufu seemed to want the best for his pyramid. He was on the lookout for new raw materials that would set him apart from his predecessors. Dependent on the Nile and the resources it offered, he decided to push back the frontiers and venture beyond the nourishing river.
Khufu aimed to expand the economy and to increase his political powers, and part of doing that is leading expeditions.
At that time, an enormous network was established in search of raw materials and connections with the entire eastern Mediterranean basin on one side.
All pharaohs who wanted to restore prosperity to their kingdom had expansionist ambitions. Obviously, Khufu, like many others, wanted to push back the frontiers of his kingdom.
He imported basalt from Fayum, granite from the Aswan region, copper and turquoise from Sinai, and wood from the Near East.
He left inscriptions at a place called Wadi Magara with his image and his name, and he went there to get copper and a beautiful turquoise stone. These were both materials that were important for the economy, particularly copper, and turquoise was used in jewelry and all sorts of decoration.
This truly was a period when Egypt opened up to the outside world. That's the first aspect, I'd say, of the importance of Khufu's reign.
One of Khufu's great expeditions was to the south of the kingdom, in present-day Sudan. This region, known as Nubia, abounded in gold and ebony, raw materials highly prized by the Egyptians.
We do have some evidence of Khufu trying to go into Nubia and meet the people there, maybe engaging in some small military battles, and certainly trying to open up trade with these southern products. And those trade expeditions would have departed from the southern border of Aswan, and the big town that we have from Aswan in the Old Kingdom is Elephantine.
Elephantine, one of the most important places for the ancient Egyptians. They believed this island was home to the god Khnum. Represented by a man's body and a ram's head, his role is to protect the inhabitants from famine by flooding the Nile.
Khnum brought the flood. He brought life to Egypt. And so with the flood came soil and silt that covered the fields and allowed for plants to grow. And also, this is the same soil that potters would use to make pots. It was the clay. So there was this idea that Khnum was the creator god that would take this soil, this dirt that was brought there from the inundation, and he would fashion people on the potter's wheel.
The god Khnum took on even greater importance during the reign of Khufu. As soon as he took power, the pharaoh claimed him as his god.
Khufu's actual name is Khnum Khufu, which means Khnum protect me. And he shortened it throughout his reign to just Khufu, and that's how most people know him.
By bearing this name, he asked for food protection for the land, the arrival of the Nile flood for the population during the reign of Khufu.
Though he differed little from other pharaohs in claiming to be a deity, Khufu was far from being considered a good pharaoh. On the contrary, ancient sources describe him as a slave-owning megalomaniac. He is said to have whipped more than 100,000 men to work under unbearable conditions to complete his pharaonic project.
When Greek and Roman travelers looked at the pyramids and European travelers looked at the pyramids, all they saw was somebody must have been terrible to build this structure. And so this is how an idea entered into our own historical consciousness that Khufu must have been some kind of terrible tyrant.
One man is largely responsible for this dark legend, the Greek historian Herodotus. In the 5th century BCE, more than 2,000 years after the reign of Khufu, he painted a portrait of the pharaoh that has stuck with him to this day.
He said Khufu was a tyrant who was not liked by his people and that he closed the temples and so on. Herodotus gave Khufu a bad press.
But the Greek historian goes even further. He tells us that in addition to being a heartless despot, Khufu was also a terrible father.
He said that very clearly, that he prostituted his own daughter to get stones to build his pyramid.
Herodotus' text shows that his daughter's prostitution was used to bring each of the 2.5 million stone blocks for each man she had. This is completely delusional because it would mean that for the 2.5 million stones there were, she had 2.5 million men.
They made him seem almost like this kind of backwards, depraved person. And so this is, I think, why some of the lingering thoughts about Khufu being a tyrant exist.
A dark legend has surrounded Pharaoh Khufu for millennia. Blame it on his colossal immortal pyramid. But there's more. Another element confirms this thought. It's perhaps the most important of Pharaoh Khufu's legacies after his pyramid. It is one of the most important pieces in the Cairo Museum. Measuring 7.5 centimeters in height, this small statuette is a priceless treasure.
This is the only authenticated statuette of Khufu. The king is shown seated on a cubic seat in a hieratic pose. He is holding the flagellum in one hand, his other hand is resting on his knees, and he was originally wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt.
It's a small statuette showing a king with rather jovial features, a little pudgy, who doesn't have at all the magnificence or majesty expected of a pharaoh who built one of the 7 wonders of the world.
The clincher is this inscription next to the statuette's legs. It's also partly responsible for the dark legend of Khufu.
If you read this name, written here in very small writing, it says Medjedu, which in Egyptian literally means he who crushes. The name would mean the oppressor par excellence. Nothing to do with his politics, maybe, or his personality, but perhaps an interpretation of one of these names makes us think he was a despot.
This legend would follow Khufu until 2013, when a fabulous discovery would completely change the way we see this enigmatic pharaoh. Located almost 300 kilometers from the Giza Plateau, the archaeological site of Wadi El Jarf is considered to be the oldest known artificial port in the world. It was while excavating here that Egyptologists discovered a precious sesame dating from the end of the reign of Khufu. These are the Wadi El Jarf papyri.
The Wadi El Jarf papyri give a counterpoint to the tradition of Khufu as a tyrant. They actually show gangs who are happy to be working for the Great Pyramid project and who are well paid for doing so.
The discovery is a bombshell. What if the results of 2 centuries of archaeological research on the pharaoh were simply wrong? French Egyptologist Pierre Tallet has pieced together this archaeological puzzle and translated the papyri. It's a logbook that plunges readers into the heart of a team of workers led by an inspector named Merer, who is in charge of supplying the Khufu pyramid construction site with stones.
Day after day, he describes his work, which consisted of fetching blocks of limestone from the Toura quarries on the eastern bank and crossing the entire Nile Valley at the very time when the water level was high and the whole area flooded, to bring these blocks of limestone to the site of the Khufu pyramid, which was still under construction at the time.
A port seems to have been built for the occasion below the construction site of the century. Merer's diary brings to life the activity of this now vanished port.
When Merer arrives in Giza, he arrives in a place called Lake Khufu, passing through a place called the entrance to Lake Khufu. And the team's destination is Aret Khufu, which literally means Khufu Ridge. As for the temple at the foot of the cliff, where the administration is located, it's called Enru Khufu, which means to live Khufu. Everything is named after Khufu.
Merer's diary also shakes up the field of knowledge about the pharaoh. It sheds new light on the construction of the Khufu pyramid.
You don't have to imagine hundreds of thousands of workers. That's a completely outdated image. These are small teams working on a permanent basis to transport and cut the blocks and assemble them on the pyramid.
But the real scoop in this ancient logbook causes an uproar in the world of Egyptology. It reveals that the workers worshipped the god Khufu while he was still alive during the construction of his pyramid.
The team is a member with other teams of bigger gangs of workers who are naming their names after Khufu, friends of Khufu, other gang names that honor the name of Khufu. It doesn't look like punishing labor. In fact, it looks like some of the gangs and the teams that compose the gangs are called from elite households as an honor to be working on the pyramid.
This discovery puts the brakes on the dark legend of Khufu. Far from being a bloodthirsty tyrant, these new elements suggest he was a good pharaoh who took good care of his workers. A new insight confirmed by an archaeological site at the foot of the pyramids. American Egyptologist Mark Lenner knows the Giza Plateau like the back of his hand. For over 40 years, he has conducted research here in the ruins of the village of Hayt el Ghurab, the place where the builders of the pyramid lived. These excavations challenge preconceived ideas about Khufu's treatment of his workers.
We have the barracks, where some of these teams and gangs probably stayed. We have evidence that they are eating prime meat, beef, cattle, but also sheep and goats. They are being extremely well fed with a very high protein and high carbohydrate diet.
They were living in a nice situation, they were comfortable, they had houses, they had a good life. And also the tombs next to the workers' settlement have been excavated, and these workers, they had broken bones that were healed. This shows that they were taken care of. There was some kind of health care for them. It wasn't like this terrible slavery that we think of in modern times.
On the contrary, the workers on Khufu's pyramid were honored to be part of the construction of his tomb, and thus of Egypt's greatness. And all this under the gaze of their pharaoh god, who, if the papyri of Wadi al-Jarf are to be believed, established his royal palace and capital on the Giza Plateau.
They indicate that the state administration was located there. We have a treasury, we have archives, and even the royal palace is clearly indicated as being near the pyramid. The place where this monument was built was, after all, the heart of Egypt at the time. The king could see his pyramid being built from his bedroom window.
But Khufu didn't stop at making Giza his home. Like Djoser at Saqqara, he had an entire necropolis built for his court around his pyramid. A city of the dead that was to be his vessel for the afterlife.
The king was surrounded by his court during his lifetime, but also after his death, in the funeral complex he had built for himself.
A funeral complex dominated by its gleaming pyramid. Mark Lenner takes us into the bowels of the pyramid to reveal the final resting place of Pharaoh Khufu, his burial chamber. Perched 40 meters above the ground, you have to pass through this monumental corridor to get there. With its 8-meter-high ceilings, the Great Gallery is a model of engineering.
And it's vaulted by corbelling. They brought each course of stone in a few centimeters, and the next one a little bit further, until at the top, it is truly a marvel of construction. All the corbelled vaulting was worked out in the reign of Khufu's father, Snefru. But nobody but Khufu attempted to take this vaulting and turn it up at 26 degrees as a kind of huge processional way to the king's burial.
This sacred corridor gives those who climb it the impression of ascending to heaven towards the god Khufu. Was this the intention of its designers? The mystery remains total. What is certain, however, is that arriving at the top offers a unique feeling.
Here we're in the heart of the pyramid. This is the king's chamber. And in this sarcophagus, Khufu's mummy was laid to rest. This is the whole reason for the Great Pyramid. All of this is for the king to live forever in the afterlife by his mummy being secure in this chamber.
We have the giant stone sarcophagus of the king that was in the burial chamber of the pyramids, but we don't have a mummy. So it was probably robbed long ago in antiquity, and it's one of the mysteries of Egyptology.
Unlike the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, which are veritable open books on the lives of the deceased, the Pyramid of Khufu is devoid of any inscriptions about the pharaoh. It raises more questions than it answers. Surprisingly, this burial chamber is not the only one in the pyramid.
Inside the Khufu pyramid, there are 3 burial chambers, one below the other, and the lowest one is even in the basement.
3 funerary apartments for one king. Why did Khufu demand so many rooms in this gigantic pyramid if he was to be buried alone? 2 theories face off.
You can see that we're still on an intellectual journey with the pyramid project. So the plan is certainly not defined from the outset. We're adapting.
I am of the party of Egyptologists who believe these were not changes in plan, they were all designed together. That Khufu intended there to be a lower chamber, a middle chamber, and the burial chamber, the king's chamber. I think the queen's chamber, the middle chamber, is probably a serdab. It's a statue chamber. There's a statue niche. The king's chamber is obviously a burial chamber. Why the lower chamber? We don't know, but it was left unfinished.
There are, however, 5 secret places rich in information. The Egyptologists who discovered them in the 19th century called them the dump chambers. Our teams obtained permission to accompany French Egyptologist Aurore Siavati into these rooms, which are off limits to the public.
Not recommended if you're afraid of heights, but it's worth it.
Getting there is a risky business. You have to pull yourself up to a height of 8 meters through ever smaller gaps.
Here we are. This is exceptional. I'm really lucky to be able to enter this space. It's a very moving moment. It's fantastic. We're on the west side of the chamber, and we're already face to face with the name of Khufu inscribed right here.
Hieroglyphics are visible to the naked eye. It takes the Egyptologist back to the time of the pyramid's construction.
You can see the name of the royal team that mentions King Khufu himself. The inscription is upside down. It's not meant to be read. It's meant to be useful at some point. And that's why it's completely upside down. Here we have the cartouche of King Khufu himself, who describes the team of workers who worked here and who left the name of his team 8 times on this wall. It's exceptional to be faced with these marks left by workers over 4,500 years ago, if not more.
Unfortunately, they reveal no new clues about the life and personality of Khufu, nor on how long it took to build the pyramid. It seems to have started at the beginning of Khufu's reign and finished at the end. But how long did this mysterious pharaoh rule Egypt?
We don't know how long Khufu reigned, and this is one of the great confusions surrounding the king. We don't have anything contemporary from his reign that gives us the exact number of years. So the Turin canon, which is the closest to the time of Khufu, that gives us 23 years. And then you have someone like Manetho, the late historian in Egypt, saying up to 60 years.
Where is the truth? Aurore Siavati has spent many years working on this question and has come up with a third hypothesis. To find out, we need to understand the ancient Egyptian calendar.
At that time, the Egyptians had their own way of counting the passing years. First, with each new reign, the count returns to 0. And then they count the years that pass according to a particular event, namely the census of all the large and small livestock of Upper and Lower Egypt. The problem is that this census doesn't take place every year.
Aurora Siavati comes up with an innovative proposal based on the livestock census.
This census takes place regularly every 2 years, 1 year on top of the other, in which case we'd have 14 censuses multiplied by 2, plus the year of the coronation, which would make our reign at least 29 years long.
That makes building a 146-meter pyramid all the more deserving.
This hypothesis remains one of many, but it has the merit of being a new, scientifically backed proposal. If the exact length of Khufu's reign is still a matter of debate, so too is his age at death. According to the evidence available to Egyptologists, Khufu seems to have seen the completion of his exceptional pyramid. What did he die of? It's impossible to say. What we do know is that when he died, his mummy was able to enter this gigantic tomb, a vessel erected by the hand of man to help him achieve immortality.
We know there was a ritual. We know there was a ceremony. We have no words or pictures to offer as evidence, but we assume, like all pharaohs, that there was a burial ceremony, and in particular, the arrival of the pharaoh's mummy in the pyramid.
He was taken to his burial chamber, which was sealed off with huge granite blocks that are virtually immovable. They really were designed so that nobody could get into the burial chambers.
No material has been found inside, but it's very likely that the king's mummy was there, along with important riches, such as the treasure of his mother, Hetepheres.
But Khufu's pyramid still held surprises in store. A fascinating archaeological discovery has been made outside, at the foot of the pyramid, which has shed light on Khufu's beliefs.
These are large shafts in which dismantled boats had been placed, and these large limestone blocks were placed like this, vertically, above these pits, to prevent access to them. And they were probably placed there at the very moment of the site's closure and the king's funeral.
These boats are priceless jewels. Built from Lebanese cedar, these 43-meter-long relics have come right down through history to us.
It is truly a marvel that it survives. The whole thing is intact and was put together by a team of restorers, and it's a beautiful, stunning boat.
When this boat was completely reassembled, it was huge, and above all, it was a solar boat.
A solar boat. The Khufu pyramid contains no inscription mentioning such a boat. To understand its function, we need to extrapolate from texts from the 5th dynasty, the one following Khufu's 4th.
We have the pyramid text from the 5th dynasty, the dynasty after Khufu, that gives a lot of details about the afterlife beliefs of the Old Kingdom and the hopes of the king for his life after death. So from these texts, we can interpret that this boat was something that the king would have used in the afterlife. He hoped to go on this boat and ascend to the stars and sail around the night sky and join the sun god in his nightly journey. That when the sun set, it would go through the underworld and the king would need to be with the sun god and to help the sun be reborn again in the morning. So this boat was crucial to his afterlife for sailing through the stars and for joining the sun.
A century separates the 5th dynasty from Khufu's 4th. A study of these texts therefore suggests that their function at the foot of the Khufu pyramid is of a similar nature, especially as they were placed there during the pharaoh's funeral, a funeral conducted by his successor, whose identity can be found on one of the large blocks used to bury the boats.
This is the Redjedef cartouche. You can see the cartouche closing and the 3 signs, Re, the pillar Jed, and the F, the horned viper at the end, thus Redjedef. It was this king, precisely, who was responsible for closing the site of the Khufu pyramid and burying his predecessor.
Redjedef, more commonly known as Djedifer, was the heir son of Khufu. His arrival on the Egyptian throne has long been a source of debate.
In the past, there had been speculation that the succession to the throne on Khufu's death was problematic and belligerent. Since then, archaeology and historical research have shown that this hypothesis was not based on any real facts. King Redjedef was the legitimate successor to his father. Like so many kings before him, he decided to found a new necropolis on the site of Abu Rawash, 7 kilometers north of Giza.
After what's thought to have been a relatively short reign, perhaps 8 to 10 years, a second son of Khufu came to power, King Khafre.
Khafre, the other great name of the Giza Plateau. He had his tomb built next to his father's, allowing this ancient jewel to survive to the present day. But the pyramid tells us nothing about the reign of this pharaoh and his father. New archaeological finds may well reveal more about Khufu and his family. The story of a unique dynasty that left its mark on the history of ancient Egypt and bequeathed to future generations some of the most fabulous monuments ever created by mankind.
One hypothesis is that these may have been two different branches of the family, perhaps princes born of different mothers, leading to rivalry in the accession to power. As usual, sources are silent on this subject, but the layout of the monuments and Khafre's desire to link himself more clearly to the reign of his father Khufu may indicate a problem in royal succession at this point in Egyptian history.
His son, Mykerinos, who came to the throne after him, had his pyramid built alongside those of his father and grandfather on the Giza Plateau. He thus completed the image of 3 inseparable pyramids that still fascinates generations of tourists. In any case, after 115 years of existence, the 4th dynasty created by Khufu's father, Sneferu, disappeared in favor of a new family of pharaohs. It left behind the memory of extraordinary leaders who consolidated the nobility of an unrivaled civilization. One of them became a mythological feature for the ancient Egyptians, not least thanks to the discovery of a papyrus.
Khufu became a hero of sorts of a series of tales that we have in the Westcar papyrus. And he has 2 particular tales that show him as somebody who is curious and interested about magic, religion, the world around him.
Discovered by a British man, Henry Westcar, in 1824, it was written 900 years after the reign of Khufu. It helps us to understand the moral imprint that the pharaoh left on the memory of the ancient Egyptians. One of the tales tells of a 110-year-old magician named Djedi, who came to Khufu's court to satisfy his curiosity.
So he heard that Djedi knew how to cut off the head of somebody and reassemble the body and bring a person to life. So he asked Djedi, "Can you do this?" And Djedi said, "Well, I can do this with animals." And then Khufu was like, "Oh, please do this to a human." And Djedi said, "No, it doesn't work like that. The magic doesn't work." So it shows us that Khufu was curious, interested, and had a respect for wisdom and wanted to know more. That made him seem like somebody who knew about his subjects, who was concerned to some degree. And so this is how he was remembered by later ancient Egyptians.
The king of the past are described as benevolent monarchs who carry out the order of the world, the Ma'at. Ma'at is the order of the world decided by the gods, the divine justice of which every king is the guarantor.
Ma'at, daughter of the god Ra, is the goddess of justice and balance. The pharaoh is the guarantor of her principles, ensuring the continuity of the land of Egypt. Mark, Aurore, Meredith, Pierre. They all try to make the stones speak every day, so that the 4,600 years that separate us from this fascinating pharaoh can reveal precious new details about his existence. Who knows if their work will reveal more about this legendary king?